6th chapter from these words. Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place with a great crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from Judea, Jerusalem, and the coast of Tyre and Sidon. They'd come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases, and those who were troubled with unclean spirits were cured. And all in the crowd were trying to touch him, for power came out from him and healed all of them. Then he looked up at his disciples and said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry now, for you will be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven, for that is what their ancestors did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is what their ancestors did to the false prophets." So ends the reading of God's holy word. Let us pray. Gracious God, it's so much easier to read Matthew than it is to read Luke, because Luke contains the woes. Those are hard words to understand, perhaps, hard words to assimilate into our living, into our value system. So we lean heavily, gracious one, upon your wisdom, upon your grace, to bring this sacred text alive in our midst, according to your holy purpose. Amen. Later on, as we move into the season of Lent, and we head toward Good Friday, when all of the forces of the world seem to be arrayed against Jesus, things get real dark for him. And it seems so patently unfair that he's treated with such cruelty at that point. And it is unfair. But it's not hard to understand, especially if we harken back to moments like today, when the good rabbi was really taking a swat at the bee's nest inhabited by those who were rich and comfortable. In case there's any doubt, Christ was not crucified because of his haircut, or even his choice of friends per se. He was crucified because he basically challenged the most essential values of his day, including that the rich were rich because God liked them better, and the poor got what they deserved. So with today's reading from Luke, we tiptoe into a very dangerous place, especially for those of us who commonly eat 3 meals a day, drive or lease an automobile, and enjoy hot and cold running water. In other words, the rich. In global terms, I've been rich all my life. And frankly, I know nothing about being poor. If my stomach aches at night, it's not because I had too little to eat. More likely it's because I had too much, like at the fish fry a couple of Fridays ago, which I devoured, and then ate dessert. So for me to even speak about poverty is about like me standing here and talking about walking on the moon. I've heard stories, but frankly, I know next to nothing. Neil Armstrong was able to talk about it because he did it. And in that same way, we probably do well to seek out someone who truly has been poor to tell us what that's like. A couple of years ago, we hosted Lynn Minderman, who developed that outreach to kids in Lesotho. And she shared a story with me. I'm not sure if she spoke about it in her presentation, about her first trip back to the United States after basically a one-year stint in the Peace Corps over in Lesotho. She walked into Wegmans and she wept. After spending a year with folks whose daily meal might be mixed in one large metal pot, how do you handle 40 feet of breakfast cereal? This passage from Luke is fraught with danger on all sides. Not only can it trigger a fast and furious guilt response on the part of any of us folks who are considered rich, but it can even infuriate the poor if they hear their poverty being glorified by these words. But I don't think Jesus is glorifying poverty. I think he's pronouncing God's deep compassion for those who suffer it and inviting us into a compassionate response as well. And there's also hope for the rich. Because we, the rich, have the power of choice, the ability to choose to help rather than hoard. Hoarding doesn't help much. Seems to me that wealth is a lot like water. It needs to keep moving in order to give life. Pooling it brings problems. Not only can it do no good, but pooled wealth, like pooled water, needs to be, first of all, contained and cared for and managed. And it runs the risk of becoming stagnant and a breeding ground for all sorts of other nasty stuff. Like a stagnant pond, it can become what you might call an attractive nuisance, posing a health risk, maybe a spiritual health risk. I gotta confess that I don't know all the dynamics behind the crash and burn stories of people that have won lotteries. But my guess is that the sudden acquisition of all that wealth and the sudden acquisition of all those cousins can create a full-time job overnight, an instant challenge of management. In 1 Timothy, there's a line that goes, "The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." And I think it's important to note from that oft-quoted line that it's the love of money that can foster all sorts of evil. It's not money in and of itself. It's our attitude toward it and the behaviors that follow from it. Anything can become an obsession and the object of our hoarding. Anything. If, for example, I suddenly became enamored of milkweed, yes, you heard me right, milkweed, I could build an enormous barn to store all the milkweed I could possibly get my hands on. And I could read voraciously about milkweed. I could subscribe to Milkweed Quarterly, join the International Society of Milkweed Connoisseurs, and really get a little crazy with my obsession. Meanwhile, a couple of things might happen. A, I might begin to neglect my pastoral duties. B, I could spend exorbitant amounts of cash building my milkweed parlors. And C, I'd probably decimate the monarch butterfly population that feeds on milkweed and thereby severely hamper the pollination that we so dearly need for our plants to grow. So the moral of this little tale is that if someone comes to your door with a milkweed scheme slammed it on their face. Is hoarding even milkweed can be a problem. Of course, the pitfalls of wealth are not just in the hoarding. We also have serious choices that we make as to how we spend it. Because each purchase we make is essentially a vote in support of practices that may be just and equitable, or they may be a little less just and even damaging to people or to the planet. And our votes count. I've already mentioned the Friday night fish fry down at Brady J's, and it was fabulous. Thank you, Lynn Damaski, for mentioning that several weeks ago. But there's a little more to that. For example, I'm hoping that the folks who caught that fish received a fair wage for their work, which incidentally is a very dangerous pastime. I'm also hoping that that fishing is sustainable. But I gotta confess, I don't really have a clue about the backstory around the fish served by Brady J's. But what I did notice in that wonderful fish fry dinner was that the meal, unfortunately, was packaged in styrofoam rather than compostable paper clamshells. And unfortunately, those petroleum-based styrofoam clamshells will be around long after you and I and even Brady J's turn to dust, because conservative estimates say that they take anywhere from 500 to thousands of years to decompose. And we won't even get into whatever the byproducts are of decomposition. So one dinner, one fish fry on a Friday night with a shell is going to outlast any one of us. I don't know if Brady J's will allow me to bring my own container for the next fish fry, because I think I probably will go again. Probably not. But I do hope that they might consider switching to compostable shells, clam shells like this, made out of, what is it? Wheat straw. I mention this just because it's a way of sort of making a concrete image of how our money speaks. And I think if Jesus is telling us anything, he seems to be telling us that we live most solidly in God when we use our wealth constructively to assist the poor, but not just the poor on the park benches, but those maybe who can't move away from the landfill that's filled with petroleum-based styrofoam, or those who catch the fish, or maybe the fish themselves. As I alluded to before, Jesus didn't get into hot water by questioning the fashion trends of his day. He hit a whole lot deeper than that, challenging the very core of people's values and behaviors. And he still does. And people still want to crucify him. Or worse yet, ignore him. Because what he asks is hard. But it's not impossible. G.K. Chesterton wrote years and years ago, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried." Well, thank God for those who've tried and continue to. Back during the last thaw, temperature went up around 50. Saw a couple of bluebirds in the backyard. And I said, once again, a quiet word of thanks to our friend Rachel Carson, who helped bring them back. Rachel was willing to try, against considerable odds. And because she did, a lot of us bird lovers have fewer woes and more wows. Of course, the work isn't over. And it's good work, the grace work of offering care and conscience, and, yes, cash, toward those efforts to help the poor, to heal the sick, clean up the polluted, resist the oppressors. But not all in one day. For goodness sakes, Got to take it slow. Sometimes it's as simple as one soda can recycled. $1 on the joy jar. One prayer. Rome wasn't built in a day, and the kingdom of God won't be either. It's a matter of making the next good choice for the sake of the poor, for the sake of all of us, for the sake of Christ.